What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And this one I want to break down what's going on with the overall market and talk about why Aapl is going to be very important for tomorrow. I'm going to talk about the big news that came out and what the option chain is suggesting for SPY and also for other tickers. Then break down some other important information about SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and many other tickers. But before breaking things down about all of this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things real quick. I am personally not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, in just about 7 days, so check it out before they run out. Anyways, let's break down what's going on with the market and some other important stuff. So, just to be clear, guys, in my previous video, I was telling you all, and not even just my previous video, like my video from yesterday, my prediction was SPY was going to either bounce or we could see like 442 and then get the bounce. And that is very close to what happened. We came down to about 442 and then tried to get this like little uptrend. And overall, the technicals are starting to look a little bit more in favor of the bulls as the market got this decent sized bounce. However, sometimes things could happen that you don't expect in the market, such as like a new piece of news. And that's kind of like why we saw SPY gap down the way it did, especially Aapl, as we had this huge news about how China has banned the iPhone use by governmental employees. That's why the market gapped down even more than expected, but it did get a bounce as time went on. Tesla even turned green for some of today. If you look at Tesla, it came down, gapped down with the market, and instead of breaking below 242, that was like the really important level, we ended up coming right back up, getting this really, really nice bounce. And Tesla held up quite decently for the majority of the day, quite nicely as well. So Tesla was not looking too bad. And I think there's more potential for the market to try to continue higher, so long as we don't get any very, very bad news. But now let's break down what's going on with the market. Let's talk about some data real quick. So we do have the wholesale inventories data coming out this is going to come out about, I think it's like 30 minutes after the market opens, but it's nothing too big, just some inventories data, nothing too huge. And besides that, there's not really anything else that's too big for the markets, nothing too crazy. I think we have CPI coming out for next week. However, I think it's coming out on Wednesday of next week, so that's going to be very important. Besides that, there's not a whole lot going on for Friday. We have a quiet day in terms of data. But for the options chain, it's worth noting that SPY has about over 900,000 puts out of the money, 138,000 in the money. And then for the call side, we have about 350,000 out of the money and 94,000 in the money. A 2.32 puts to call ratio for tomorrow, with 445 being max pain. And if I was the market maker, I would basically do two things. I would close SPY a little bit green around 445 or higher. And I don't see us closing below that. I think the odds greatly favor us closing above 445 because of this. But one thing that's worth mentioning is that there are lots and lots of these puts expiring, right? The majority of positions are puts with a 2.32 put to call ratio. If I was the market maker, I would be incentivized to try to push the market up and try to get as many of these puts out of the money as possible, just to cause more and more pain. And we know how much these market makers love to squeeze shorts. So there's a good chance there could be like a mini short squeeze. It doesn't have to be like that big. As long as they close us above 445, the odds do favor some green for tomorrow and the market getting a green close, in my opinion. Now, looking at something else that's interesting on the overall options chain for SPY on the call side, looking at 445, I think this is the call side. Yeah, so 445 is going to be very, very important. This was a very big level for today. We actually saw a big change there. But if you look at the options chain for tomorrow, this is where things get very, very interesting. Because when you look at 445, we didn't really see much change in the open interest right there, but we're starting to see a lot of changes going on for the higher strikes, such as like 446 and beyond. So we're starting to see more interest on those levels. The volume has been about the same for tomorrow, but going to be watching many of these strikes, especially 446. We're seeing a lot of open interest on that. On the put side, however, not really seeing anything. No, we saw a lot of the open interest dropping for 445 for tomorrow. So we're starting to see puts being closed, and we're starting to see less and less interest within those levels. Now, the volume is relatively high right about at this 444 level, but like I said before, it does not work in the market maker's benefit. So it makes more sense that if I was the market maker, looking at the amount of calls, the very, very high volume at like 445, also around like 446, that they might pump the market up, pump us up a little bit, and then there could be like a sell-off at the end of the day, but it's not going to be that bad, and the market could still close green. That's what seems very probable. And I'm leaning a little bit more in that direction, but I think that it's going to depend a lot on Aapl, how Aapl ends up performing. So this is going to be one of the most important tests, because when you look at the daily charts on Aapl, check this out, guys, we have this big gap that is left, and Aapl has not started to fill the gap just yet. We have this gap all the way up to about 182 that's unfilled on the daily. But with the news coming out, you never know what could happen as the MACD is turning more bearish. So we're very mixed right now, and it really depends on this test. Can Aapl break and hold 178? As long as there's no bad news, it should be able to. If it manages to hold that level, it could start pushing to fill this gap. And if we do end up filling the gap, what I'm predicting is if we hold 178, what might happen is Aapl pushes up for tomorrow, fills the gap, and then it comes right back down just a little bit, and we end up closing somewhat green, but we end up like kind of cooling off a little bit before we end up closing. And I think that's what's the most probable outcome looking at the options chain and etc. So on SPY, for example, on the daily chart, we're very close to where our 50 EMA happens to be. And then what's worth noting is that we have this very bullish looking wedge that developed on it. We have a bullish divergence on SPY as well. It looks to me like SPY is going to likely try to get to like 446, maybe a little bit higher, close to like the 447s, then reject off this and start cooling off as the day goes on and still close a little bit above max pain. That is what I'm predicting for tomorrow, and I find that very, very likely. Now, for supports, don't forget to watch 444 as critical support, not to mention like, 443.5, 442.5, and etc. My gut tells me, my gut is telling me we're going to see this thing push up, try to push up to these higher levels, reject off our 200 EMA or very close to that, and then just trade a little sideways as the day goes on, maybe cool off a little bit later on, but still close kind of green for the end of the day. I think Tesla's going to follow this trend. If you look at Tesla, there's a potential bullish divergence as well developed right here. I think the odds favor Tesla pushing back up to like the mid 250s, then rejecting and then trading sideways, maybe cooling off a little bit, but still closing green. That's where I'm leaning towards on Tesla. So 255 is the level to watch for, which is where this imbalance is. Then we have this very important resistance at 257.5. That's going to be important for Tesla as resistance. Also, we have 252.5 as resistance, which I think Tesla is going to break. So I think 255 is going to be the level where we see a lot of action. We might gap down tomorrow, then get the push up intraday, then cool off at the very end of the day and still close kind of green. That's what I'm predicting for tomorrow. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated. We have support at 250, 248, then we have like 6.5, and then below that we have like 242.5 and etc. But I'm predicting might kind of gap down a little bit, end up in the very high 240s, push up intraday to these higher levels, the mid 250s, cool off a little bit as the day goes on, but still close green. That's what I am predicting for Tesla. Aapl, I think it's going to do something similar. We could see this thing make an attempt to fill the gap. It could get back up to like 180 or so. If it gets above the 50 EMA, then it's going to fill the gap to like 181 plus. Really depends on if it could break 180. That's going to be our test for tomorrow. I believe it's going to test 180 at the very least. We might see Aapl cool off a little bit as time goes on and trade a little sideways later. But look for a pop, then a drop, but a green close on Aapl as well. I think the QQQ is going to try to pump too. The odds do favor that, looking at the bullish structure. We're going to see this thing maybe test the 200 EMA, try to fill this gap around just under 375, then reject after that, come back down to 373, and end up closing somewhere in the green. I think the QQQ is going to do that, and we should get a decent close. I think Nvda is going to try to push up. Now, don't forget we have this imbalance down here. We also have critical support at 460, 458. Those are some small ones. Then we have like the really critical support is going to be 448 to 450. And then for resistance, we have like 465 and 470. I predict that Nvidia is going to come down to where this imbalance is, 458. Bounce off that. So it's going to like open down here, bounce and start pushing to fill this gap. It's going to hit like 470, reject off 470, then start cooling off and close in like the mid 460s, a little bit in the green. So I'm predicting a green close, a little pump, then a bit of a drop, and yet a green close. That's what I'm predicting for Nvidia as well. I think Microsoft's going to do the same thing. It's looking a little bit weaker, but we are establishing a bullish divergence. Could get a bounce, and we might see Microsoft test 332, reject off that, and kind of trade sideways from there. For AMD, this is establishing a potential inverse head and shoulders like structure. There is divergence forming, but it's not looking that strong. If you look at the 30 minutes, not looking that great. The 4-hour time frame is also still not looking too great for it. So it looks like it's going to be very stationary to me. Could see a retest. I could see it retest like 107 or so, but it might reject off this area because we have two resistance levels, the 15 to 200. So the 107s could be retested. Then a rejection, we might see it just close very, very flat, not looking as strong as other stocks out there. For the NASDAQ, this is once again looking like it wants to fill this gap up here, so it could push up even more, which could be because of Apple potentially bouncing. So I could see this thing testing the 50 EMA around 13,852. That seems very possible. SPX is no different. It hasn't fully filled the gap just yet. Looks like there could be more upside coming. 44.62 is possible, maybe a little bit higher to like 44.70. And this could help SPY pump a little bit. SPY is going to follow SPX, of course. And I think there's more upside potentially coming for this. The VIX ended up turning kind of red. Pretty ironic. We have this other gap down here. We might see the VIX break below like 14.3 and come down to fill this next gap around 14. If that's the case, as the VIX is turning more bearish, that could be because of the market potentially pumping. The dollar ended up closing just above 105, which is decent. But what is a little concerning for the people out there is that it's getting very tight on momentum. And it does have this bearish divergence that developed on the 4-hour and also on the 30-minute time frames. That tells me that we could see a rejection on uh, the dollar. We could see it come down to about 104.95, start cooling off just a little bit. And if that's the case, that could be because of the market potentially starting to pump a little bit. On Coinbase, we got a nice bounce today after new regulations came out. But here's the thing about it. This thing is a little bit overbought. It might end up gapping down, opening around the 80 level. It could retest 78, then bounce off that and start pushing back around 80. Could see a very flat close. So I'm still in that direction, but I do believe it's a little bit overbought. So I'd be careful buying at these higher levels. On Google, Google, in my opinion, has a bullish divergence trying to push up. You're going to be watching it retest 137.75 and then reject off that and kind of like cool off a little bit and still close a little bit in the green. I think Amazon's going to do something very similar. Look at Amazon, we already got our bounce. Amazon's losing some momentum, but off this very, very nice looking trend. Going to be watching it retest this like 139 area. So right about here, I think Amazon could retest that, reject off that, and still close very, very flat. Now it might gap down first, then get that push up before coming back down and still closing somewhat in the green. Meta came down, got a very, very interesting looking type of price action. You could see we saw these liquidity grabs down here. Very flat. I mean, it's only down like 0.17%. I think it's going to maintain in this range between 301 to about 295, just go back and forth and back and forth. We might get a green day for tomorrow because of the market, so I'm still leaning in that direction. So hopefully this video was as clear as possible. I think there's a chance the market's going to try to push up a little bit. We haven't fully filled the gap up to 446 on SPY, and I think SPY has potential to do so. And I think tomorrow there's going to be a little bit more upside coming, then a rejection, followed by the market potentially cooling off and still closing above max pain in the green, but a slight like kind of like pump and a drop as the day goes on. And I think that's what I'm predicting for the market, especially based off how we're looking. Apple could rescue the market by trying to hold 178. But I mean, it might just be a small pump and then like, kind of like a drop after that. Those are also on the table. So this is what technical analysis is kind of like suggesting and based off the options chain too. However, let me just note that the options chain and technicals are not necessarily everything. They are helpful, but they're not always 100% sufficient because sometimes external pieces of news could come out and I can't always predict those. But for now, I think that this is the best likely estimate of what the market's going to do based off what we're seeing so far. And so far, this is all I can really say. So I thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day. Get ready for tomorrow. It's going to be Friday. Hope you guys have a fun one. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you and peace out.